Okay, our last episode with Job, the book of Job, chapters 38, 39, 40, and then we'll skip to 42. Well, how about that? Another week behind us. This is our last episode for the book of Job. And if you haven't realized it yet, one of the reasons the book of Job seems so different to many of us is because the book leans towards, in fact, it embraces what is known as the Eastern philosophy and mindset, full of mystery, paradox, and communal realities rather than the demanding logical proofs, the linear arguments, or the individual guilt of Western thought. As Western thinking believers, we prefer clear causes, moral balances, and direct answers. When it comes to the mystery and the logic, the Eastern view is that truth is deep and hidden, and questions matter more than neat answers. Whereas to Western thought, truth is a puzzle to solve, and every effect must have a clear, logical cause. But here in the book of Job, God answers Job with more questions from nature instead of explaining the rules of justice, mercy, grace, and such. In fact, next in Job chapters 38 through 40, God answers Job out of a storm. He questions Job's human limits regarding the creation of the earth, the oceans, the weather, and animals. Job realizes his smallness and stays silent, but God pushes him further to acknowledge divine power. So here we go, verses 1 through 3. God speaks from the whirlwind. He tells Job to get ready to answer his questions like a strong man. And I was ignorant to the Eastern mindset until the last few years. I didn't realize how much, through Rome and such, the Western mind is very different. I learned that from Michael Rood, Nehemiah Gordon, and other Bible scholars that spent time in Jerusalem, more than just a trip there, but became immersed in the culture and began to realize how different modern Christianity is, especially the Western mind view, and even more so the American Christian mind. It's really expanded my understanding to appreciate things, at least in a limited way, like the book of Job. So, with that being said, verse 1, then Yehovah, I love it. Verse 1, the divine name, Papa John had the honor to restore that, highlighted in turquoise blue. Then Yehovah answered Job. He answered Eov out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. So God asks where Job was when he laid. Next, he's going to ask Job where he was when he laid the foundations of the earth, and set its measurements, and locked the sea behind doors. This is really some heavy theological discussion. We're getting to the meat of reality, and man in our simpleness thinks we can understand it all. Verse 4, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and the sons of Elohim shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shalt thou thy proud waves be stayed. This reminds me of a Calvinist preacher. I can see his face. Um, and he talks about how God creates the heavens and the earth and the waves of the sea and sets their bounds, and they obey. But yet, when he asks us to do the simplest thing, we scream no. It's a powerful, his name escapes me. I've shared that quote before, but my goodness, could we just be as obedient as the earth and the waves of the sea and such things? Even the planets in their rotation. Quite remarkable that we seem to just dig our heels in with with the slightest command or perhaps even a suggestion from God, and we refuse. That just shows the stubbornness of the natural man and woman in all of us. Let's continue here. Um, God next asks Job uh, if Job has ever commanded the morning or explored the deep springs of the sea. Oh, that's cool stuff. I have a science friend, and he talks about this stuff. Dean Sessions with the Universal Model. What an amazing uh, concept. Verse 12, hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the day springs to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it? It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment, and from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the deep depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee, or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest it all. You know, we can't answer any of these questions. We have a hint of understanding at the best, at our best, right? Next, God questions Job about the storehouses of light, darkness, snow, hell, rain, and the placement of the stars in the sky. Verse 19, where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? That thou shouldest take it to the bond thereof, and that thou shouldest know the paths to the house thereof. Knowest thou it because thou wast then born, or because the number of thy days is great? Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow, or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail? Have I reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? Or which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? By what way is the light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? It's interesting here in Arizona, as soon as the sun goes straight overhead, it's like one click past straight, uh, straight up, the afternoon headwinds come upriver right here by the ranch. You can just almost set your clock to it. The afternoon headwinds come, even on a calm day, but that sun clicks just past straight up noon, or at least straight up, and suddenly the winds from the west start to come. Quite interesting. Verse 24, by what way is the light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? Who hath divided a watercourse for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder? To cause it to rain on earth where no man is, on the wilderness wherein there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. Hath the rain a father, or who hath begotten the drops of dew? Wow. Out of whose womb came the ice, and hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Canst thou bind the sweet influence of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Now, verses 31 through 33, right here, God is asking Job a series of rhetorical questions. And God's focus here it's on the celestial. He's making reference to the stars in the heavens. And most of us would recognize Pleiades and Orion that were mentioned in verse 31. I recognize those. But in verse 32, I had to look up what Maseroth is. What's that referring to? Well, it's a Hebrew word often thought to mean the signs of the zodiac or southern constellation. And when it comes to Arcturus, it is widely understood by many modern biblical scholars to mean the Great Bear constellation, Ursa Major, and its sons or cubs, referring to the surrounding stars known to most of us as the Big Dipper, rather than just a single modern star. So these verses remind Job and us that God holds supreme power over the universe while human power is very small. We are almost powerless, and left to ourselves, that describes us perfectly. But thankfully, if we just claim what Christ offers us, made possible through his perfect life, perfect death, his offering, as he stood in our place as the guilty, as to be judged and condemned, to then, though innocent, accept our guilt so that we can then be empowered by his grace and we're not left to ourselves. What a wonderful thing. The scriptures become powerful to me the more I come to know God. It's quite remarkable, and his Son. Verse 33, knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover thee? Canst thou send lightnings that may go and say unto them, here we are? Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts? Or who hath given understanding to the heart? Do we have to think about breathing? Do we have to tell our heart to beat? No. Who did that? I'll let the Spirit confirm that to you. Verse 37, who can number the clouds in wisdom? Or who can stay the bottles of heaven? When the dust groweth into hardness and the clouds cleave fast together. Next, God ends this chapter. He is by asking Job if Job can hunt prey for the lions or feed the young ravens when they cry to him. Wilt thou hunt the prey for the lion or fill the appetite of the young lions? When thou couch in their dens or abide in the covert to lie in wait? Who provideth for the raven his food? When his young ones cry unto Elohim, they wander for lack of meat. Beautiful truths to ponder. And I hope in your life, time grants you the privilege to do this on your own. Just you, the Spirit, and God. Next, verse 39. In this chapter, God questions animal life. In verses 1 through 4, God asks if Job knows where the mountain goats, or when the mountain goats and deer give birth. Here we go, verse 1. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth? Or canst thou mark when the hinds do calve? Canst thou, boy, this old English can be challenging. Canst thou number the months that they fulfill? Or knowest thou the time when they bring forth? They bow themselves, they bring forth their young ones, they cast out their sorrows. Their young ones are in good liking, they grow up with corn. They go forth and return not unto them. Next, God points out the wild donkey which scorns the city and asks if Job can tame the wild ox to work for him. Verse 5, who hath sent out the wild ass free, or who hath loosed the bands of the wild ass? Whose house have I made the wilderness, and barren land his dwellings? He scorneth the multitude of the city, neither regardeth he the crying of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he seeketh after every green thing. While the unicorn, or will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him because his strength is great, or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him that will bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn? Now, back in verses 9 and 10, it mentions the creature, the unicorn. I encourage you to look that up. Just Google it. Ask put those verses in into Google and ask what Bible scholars believe that to be over the generations. Next, God, beginning with verse 13, God talks about the ostrich, which leaves her eggs in the dust, noting she lacks wisdom. 13. Gavest thou goodly wings unto the peacocks, or wings and feathers unto the ostrich, which layeth her eggs in the earth and warmeth them in dust, and forgetteth them that the foot may crush them, or that the wild beast may break them? She is hardened against her young ones, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear. Interesting, right? Verse 17, because Elohim hath deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding. What time she lifted up herself on high, she scorneth the horse and his rider. I mean, if we ever wrap our minds around that, there's a whole world in just understanding what God has given the ostrich or not given the ostrich and how that creature functions. Quite remarkable. Next, God describes the war horse, asking Job if Job gave it strength and a fearless jump. Verse 19, hast thou given the horse strength? Hast thou clothed his neck with thunder? Canst thou make him afraid as a grasshopper? The glory of his nostrils is terrible. He paweth in the valley and rejoiceth in his strength. He goeth on to meet the armed men. He mocketh at fear and is not affrighted, neither turneth he back from the sword. The quiver rattleth against him, the glittering spear and the shield. He swalloweth the ground with fierceness and rage, neither believeth he that it is the sound of the trumpet. He saith among the trumpeters, ha ha. That's funny. And he smelleth the battle afar off, the thunder of the captains and the shouting. What, how almost poetic the way that even in English that's poetic. I wonder what it sounds like in Hebrew. Next, God asks if the hawk flies and the eagle builds its nest by Job's wisdom. Here we go, verse 26. Doth the hawk fly by thy wisdom and stretch her wings towards the south? Doth the eagle mount up at thy command and make her nest on high? She dwelleth and abideth on the rock, upon the crag of the rock and the strong place. From thence she seeketh the prey, and her eyes behold afar off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she. Now that was chapter 39. That went really fast. But in the context of chapter 39, Papa John, I just want to relate. Many of these verses mean a lot to me. I relate to them because I was raised on a small farm in Arizona from a boy my whole life, milking cows and such, through high school and everything. I'm very familiar and comfortable in the role of a farm boy and the many responsibilities that come with that. Many of my life lessons were learned in the country setting, surrounded with domestic animals. I know what it's like to have a well-behaved milk cow, but I also know the frustration of a milk cow that will not be well-behaved. Additionally, in life, I understand when people lose faith in friends and other people based on bad behavior and such. But when I see believers who allow the bad behavior of other people to cause them to doubt the reality of God, I am honestly confused. So my prayer is, may we be like Job and never lose our faith in God because of the bad behaviors we witness by mere mortals that we come across throughout life. May my children and my children's children, my future posterity, my extended family and friends today, may we learn from Job and keep our faith no matter what comes our way. It's quite remarkable to really ponder the truths taught here in the book of Job. Now, next in chapter 40, we see Job's silence and God's second challenge. Verses 1 and 2, God asks if the one who finds fault with the Almighty is ready to answer him. Uh-oh. He's talking to you, Job. And you know what? He might as well be talking to us. Verse 1, moreover, Yehovah. I love it. The name restored. Moreover, Yehovah answered Eov and said, shall he that contendeth with El Shaddai instruct him? He that reproveth Elohim, let him answer it. Job answers that he is too small. That's what happens next. He puts his hands over his mouth and says he will speak no more. Very wise. Verse 3, then Eov answered Yehovah and said, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay mine hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer, yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. How humbling. I've been chastened by the Lord, not to the extent that Job is perhaps, but I cherish those memories. God chastens those he loves. He'll teach us if we'll listen, and if we complain loud enough, he'll straighten us out. I've lived long enough to have that experience more than once. I think I shared it one time in a previous episode where I actually saw sparks, like I got flicked on the forehead one time. It was quite remarkable. Next, God speaks again from the storm. He challenges Job to try ruling the world, humbling the proud and crushing the wicked if he has an arm like God. Think about that. Amazingly, God's still in control. Otherwise, he'd be jumping to and fro and running around like Satan is, because his time is short. God has got this. Remarkable to realize that, because at times it doesn't feel like it, right? Verse 6, then answered Yehovah unto Eov out of the whirlwind and said, gird up thy loin now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Hast thou an arm like Elohim? Or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the wrath of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud, and abase him. Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then will I also confess unto thee that thine own right hand can save thee. We can't, can we? Man cannot save himself any more than we can lift ourselves up by standing in a bucket and lifting up with the handles. I've heard these analogies. Maybe they're not that great of analogies, and it's just remarkable. I love where my mind goes. I get a glimpse of understanding, at least a hint. Next, God describes a massive creature called the behemoth. This creature is often seen as a powerful land animal like a hippopotamus or an elephant, noting it is the first of God's works and cannot be easily conquered. Verse 15, behold now behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Lo, now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are a strong piece of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of Elohim. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reeds and fens. The shadow trees cover him with their shadows, the willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river and hasteneth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan, the Yarden, unto his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes, his nose pierces through snares. I've read and studied these verses, and some people believe he's describing certain types of dinosaurs. Which did come first? Interesting to think about. All right, we're going to skip Job 41 just for the sake of time. And that's where he talks about Leviathan and with the hook and the tongue. Again, creatures that we're not sure what he's talking about. Kind of fun to consider. But before we get into the last chapter, chapter 42 of the book of Job, I just want to give a shout out to Jared Halverson, my favorite LDS scholar. When it comes to bridging the gap between Eastern and Western thought, my favorite scripture scholar is Brother Jared Halverson. He seems able to jump back and forth between the two worlds better than most evangelical Bible scholars in the modern American Christianity. In his scriptural teachings, Jared Halverson addresses the paradox of a just God in an unfair world by emphasizing that life is inherently unfair, but God is perfectly fair, and we must never confuse the flaws of the fallen world with the character of the Creator. Wow. He can talk about the smallest verse for so long. He's he's actually more long-winded than Michael Rood, who's another Bible scholar that I love. But Jared Halverson uh, comes from the same LDS background that Papa John comes from, and I believe he's the most well-rounded scholar that I've come to know of. I actually got to speak to him on the phone one time, did a Zoom call with him and my son Isaac years ago, and he was kind enough through a common friend to allow us to ask him a few questions. A remarkable scholar. Now he talks about his podcast is called Unshaken, and he's been doing it for years. You can find it on YouTube and other podcast sources. Jared Halverson, and his series is called Unshaken. He frequently explores how scriptures navigate this exact tension, the tension between. Well, let me just back up a little bit because I interrupted myself. As the host of the scriptural podcast Unshaken, Halverson frequently explores how Scripture navigates this exact tension. Halverson breaks down the dynamic using several core scriptural concepts and frameworks. Halverson teaches a concept called proving contraries. He takes that phrase, and it took me not months, probably years to appreciate the point he was trying to drive into my head about the proving of contraries. It's a principle from the Latter-day Saint history, meaning to hold two seemingly opposite truths in active tension to uncover deep spiritual realities. The contrary, like life throws horrific injustices at people unevenly, yet Scripture declares that God is no respecter of persons and is perfectly just. So the resolution of that, Halverson explains, is that instead of letting this paradox break our faith, we must see that the concept of justice itself does not originate from the natural world. True fairness is a supernatural attribute of God. God allows the natural world to be unfair so the agency or free will, commonly called free will, agency and free will can exist, but he plays the long game, God does, to ensure the ultimate cosmic justice. So Jared Halverson addresses the misconception here of Job, suffering versus punishment. He does it so well. I hope you can find his episodes on this subject. Uh, when analyzing the book of Job, Jared Halverson addresses the fundamental question of why bad things happen to good people. Job's friends operate under the false assumption that God's justice is immediate and transactional, meaning if you suffer, you must have sinned. Halverson warns believers never to confuse a trial for growth with a punishment for sin. God's justice is not compromised by our temporary suffering. Rather, suffering is often the very catalyst God uses to stretch our spiritual capacities. Papa John loves how Halverson describes the cross as the ultimate equalizer. The vertical beam pointing to God, reaching to God, and the horizontal beam is where we point towards those around us. And it reminds us that we should be fellowshipping and serving. The sign of the cross in that way is a beautiful symbol for Papa John, and especially for my sweetheart. She loves that symbol. Let me find my place here. Um, I've lost my spot. Okay. So Jesus, so God took on flesh, and he did not insulate himself from the world's inequalities. He experienced poverty, betrayal, and horrific undeserved death, and grace fills the gap. So Brother Howerson teaches that on the cross, Jesus absorbed human injustice. The atonement perfectly honors the reality of the eternal law and justice while simultaneously filling our broken, unfair realities with divine grace. And Papa John just going to tell you, I have to remind you, what is divine grace? It's divine empowerment. It's not a license to sin. Divine grace is an actual power that not only enables us, but makes us more stronger. It makes us stronger despite the wickedness around us to live a holy and righteous life, despite the wickedness of the world we are currently in. I love divine grace. The indwelling of God's Spirit has not left me. His presence has not left me since May of 2017. That's quite remarkable. 9 years, some 9 years ago. And Howerson drives the point home quite often. Take time and listen to him. He changed my life, like many of these other Bible scholars. I have a lot more quotes from Howerson as we get further into the New Testament. Ultimately, Howerson's teachings reminds believers that when life is unfair, it is not evidence that God has abandoned us. Instead, it's an invitation to trust his character over our immediate circumstances. And here, next in Job chapter 42, the final chapter of the book of Job, it records Job's humble reply and repentance to God. God's judgment upon Job's three friends for speaking wrongly, and Job's complete physical and financial and relational restoration is what we're going to study next. Job answers and repents beginning in verses 1 through 6. Here we go. Then Eov answered Jehovah and said, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore have I uttered that I understood not. Things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. Hear, I beseech thee, and I will speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ears, but now mine eyes seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. I understand all 6 of those verses in ways I never did as a youth. If you don't feel like God is near, just don't give up. He's in the details of your life, right here with Job in his suffering, and just like he did in the book of Esther. Wow. Next, God rebukes Job's friends. This is going to take us through verse 7 through 9. And it was so that after Jehovah had spoken these words unto Eov, Jehovah said to Eliphaz the Temanite, My wrath is kindled against thee and against thy 2 friends, for ye have not spoken of me the things that is right, as my servant Job, Eov, hath. Verse 8, Therefore take unto you now 7 bullocks and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for thee, or for you. For him will I accept, lest I deal with you after your folly, in that ye have not spoken of me the things which is right, like my servant Job, Eov. This is the part of the book of Job that, for Papa John, when I have Bible scholars trying to convince me that even though the book of Job is so Eastern in the mindset, And some people say it's from a culture different from Judaism, from the ancient Hebrews, from like Father Adam and such, and Isaac and Jacob. No, he's telling him to go do what's taught in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, with the offering of bullocks and rams and such. I really believe Job, if he's not fictional, definitely was part of ancient Israel at some time. I could be wrong, but that's my feeling at this point. Or he's fictional, but I tend to believe it might be a real story. Maybe not. It's hard to tell. Verse 9. So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did according to Jehovah commanded them. Jehovah also accepted Job. So next, Job is restored and blessed in verses 10 through 17. Hang on, this is beautiful. Verse 10, and Jehovah turned the captivity of Job when he prayed for his friends. Also, Jehovah gave Job twice as much as he had before. And then, verse 11, then came there unto him all his brethren and all his sisters and all they that had been of his acquaintance before, and did eat bread with him in his house. And they bemoaned him and comforted him over all the evil that Jehovah had brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one an earring of gold. Verse 12. So Jehovah blessed the latter end of Job, even more than his beginnings. For he had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she asses. And he had also 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he called the name of the first Yemimah, and the name of the second Ket-iah, and the name of the third Karin Hapuk. And in all the land were no women found so fair as the daughters of Eov. And their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. And after this lived Job, Eov, 140 years, and saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. And we end with verse 17. So Eov died being old and full of days. He really must have had to have been a real person in the history of ancient Israel. May we learn from Job, and may we not complain as long and through as many chapters as he has. May our friends treat us better. May we surround ourselves with people that believe in God and don't doubt his promises. They are sure. God swears upon his existence as an eternal being that everything he has promised us, if we'll just live his holiness code and claim the promises of the atonement made available through his Son, Jesus Christ, his perfect life, perfect death, and perfect gift he offers us. Thanks for joining me through the book of Job. It's perhaps not an easy one, but I have been edified. I hope some of that can come through the computer your direction. And I look forward to talking to each of you again very soon.